I was trying to remove that thing. Sorry. Okay, sorry, we're back. Got cut off. Don't worry, these will both be you'll see the replay on the side, so sorry about that. Fatima and I pressed the wrong button and I screwed up.
Yeah, it's all Bobby.
It's all me. Sorry, it's all on me. So we were talking about just the importance of men being allies. And I learned this from my dad because he was like, look, if you want rights for being a person of color, you need to get people who are not people of color to be on board. And it's so important in order to have that equality. And so it's the same thing for men to be able to be allies. I think it's so important.
And I think, if look at your organization, are there any, boards or groups or opportunities for you to get involved and being a voice for your organization? Think of it sort of as an opportunity for you to sort of step up and own that space. I mean, Coke and a lot of other organizations, and Atlassian is another one, they have like a lot of ally groups that they create within the organization that are responsible for, they almost act as like advocacy groups for people. So if you don't feel comfortable calling people out in front of them, like you have a group of people that you trust and, you can go to sort of address your issues, and it's a support system. So think about if there's any policies or groups that you can implement within your own organization to sort of get to that place where you feel comfortable.
And another question, Fatima, what do you think drives diversity and inclusion in leaders and companies? Is it personal experience or general awareness?
What do you think drives diversity and inclusion in leaders and companies? Is it personal experience or general awareness? Yeah, I mean, I like to see the good in people. So I'd like to think simply that people who have access and exposure and experience, they generally tend to be more diverse. I think one of the reasons that I come from a very diverse background. My school was really diverse. I grew up with people from all over the world. And because of that, I think I ended up being someone who naturally gravitated towards diversity. But if you don't necessarily grow up in that environment, say you grew up in, a small town somewhere where you only had access and exposure to one, set of people, you might just feel naturally more comfortable in that group, and it's hard to break out of that mold. And so I think for a lot of people, it's more fear talking or the unknown and more unconscious bias rather than them typically being actually believing deep down that, oh, my race is superior or my gender is superior or I actually know more. I actually don't think that's true. I think people are just more comfortable with their people, whatever that means, because they haven't necessarily interacted with people from all walks of life. So I think it's all about breaking those barriers and being able to work with people from all walks of life.
Another question here, how do you convince top management that diversity is as important as any recruitment strategy?
Oh yeah, I think it's definitely up there with all the recruitment strategies, if not more important. I mean, I think these days finding the right people to run and grow your businesses is one of the biggest challenges for CEOs. And I think a lot of CEOs are now turning to diversity to solve this issue. I think, it's also important to remember that diversity doesn't just support businesses, but also the economies they operate in. Actually, I was reading a study done by Catalyst, which is a non-profit organization. Okay. And they said that, if we just focus on increasing female employment in the workplace, we can increase GDP of a country by 5% in the US, 11% in Italy, and 27% in India. And that's before we even begin to quantify the positive social impacts that would also arise. And so I think, if your management doesn't get that diversity is a really important, focus, then talk about it from a business perspective. Like, why is it good for your business? Not just, is it the right thing to do? Think of it from I've read so many studies, as Bobby just pointed out. Yeah. Make a case for it. Be like, here are all the stats that have shown that it's simply good for financial performance. And, if they don't understand that it's the right thing to do angle, they'll at least understand the financial angle.
Okay, another question. So how do you get more applicants into things like plumbing, oil refineries, nursing, teaching, etc.?
Yeah, I really wish I had the answer to that. I really don't. I'm not obviously an expert in this space, but also more so I think, I think there is a lot of stereotypes and bias that men would be better at plumbing and refineries, and women are more I think they say they're more maternal and they have better instincts with people, which I'm the least maternal person ever, so I'd be a terrible nurse. But I think there are a lot of those unconscious biases and stereotypes out there that people think are very, just in general, very core to who people who people are.
Right.
But I think at the end of the day, you have to follow like what you're passionate about. And that's why I think, I don't necessarily know what the right way is to recruit more applicants, because I think that's more of like an HR strategy. But I think that, we as people can be doing more to advocate for that.
Yeah, and I think that it's just important to encourage young boys and girls as they're going through the education system to say like you can do whatever you want. There's no barrier behind that. Make sure they don't have any sort of stigma around any one of those things. If they want to pursue plumbing, want to pursue nursing, it should be totally okay.
And people are watching you. When my first job, I was doing sales for an energy company, and firstly, sales is a very male-dominated industry.
Yeah.
And energy industry is really male-dominated too. So it was literally me at the table with like a billion dudes.
Right.
And I think that really helped for women that I was mentoring and people around me to be like, oh, here's a woman in a very male-dominated industry, and she's doing really well at her career, and she's very respected by her male counterparts. And so, people are watching you. If you want to be the example of someone who, sort of is a trailblazer for a new industry, I think a lot of people are watching and sort of will follow suit.
Sure. Another question: what's more important? This one's tricky. What's more important: diversity, occupational health and safety, or professional development?
Yeah, I think they're all important. They all have their own sort of categories and places, and I think they're all important. I mean, diversity, we've sort of talked about why it's so important. Occupational health and safety, you want to have measures in place, that are structured to support your employees in case of a situation arises. It's always good to be prepared. And professional development, if you're career driven, if you're hungry for success, and if you're a hustler, then you crave that professional development.
Or if you want employees that want to be more productive, loyal, and retain them, that's fine. I mean, I think that's a trick question, Max, because to me, health and safety, how can you say no to health? We don't want to be safe. Obviously, you have to be safe.
And we don't give a shit about your personal development either. No, all of those are important. They have their own categories.
So yeah, that's fine. I want to ask you high school training. I'm saying before high school, guys. I'm saying elementary school. What about diversity? So let's say a startup, okay? Because you run a startup. I have a startup. At what point do I start thinking about the diversity in the workplace as a startup? Because usually you're not focused on that. There's a certain point where you get to decide, okay, you know what? Wow, now everyone here is this race. Everyone here is this. And we need more women, or we need more this. When you start thinking about that, is it from the beginning, or what do you think?
There's two things that I want to address. One is a question that I just thought, and they were talking about how it's great to train them when they're younger, in high school and younger, and I think that's so important. Yeah. Actually, there's an accelerator that launched in Toronto, but they're now in Boston, New York, Vegas. They're like launching all over the world. They're called the Knowledge Society, and they're an accelerator for high school kids. You should actually. I
met two of them. They're amazing.
Oh, amazing!
Oh my God!
And so that's one of the things they're doing. They're really taking those kids, because they're so malleable at that young age, and nurturing them, not only their skill sets, but also the social piece as well, where you get to interact with people from all walks of life, and people are coming in from all sorts of neighborhoods and areas, across Ontario to be a part of this accelerator. And I think that's a game changer, because that's giving the proximity that I talked about earlier. And sorry, your question was, at a startup, at what point do you start thinking about diversity? Honestly, right from the beginning. I mean, I have a startup. I 88 is a startup. I also have my own software that I'm launching this spring, and I constantly, for me, I think there's a dialogue running in my head all the time, which is when I'm recruiting applicants, this person is bringing this skill set to the table. So maybe since I already have this skill set, this is the type of person that I want. I don't look at it from we only have 4 men. We have 4 men, so we need a couple of women to balance it out. Or we have 3 white people, so we'd like 2 brown people to balance it out. I don't think of it from that perspective. I think of it from a background and skill set perspective. And when you look at it from that perspective, you'll naturally attract people from all walks of life, because no one race is one skill set. And so generally I think of it from the gaps and holes that you fill, and not necessarily people who you relate to or who are similar to you. You want people who are different from you, who will challenge the status quo and disagree with you, because that's what builds a high performing culture, and that's what drives better business decisions. So that's what I want. I want the makeup of my team to be completely different, so that when we all come to the table, we bring different perspectives and opinions.
And I see Angie mentioned, Angie's a friend of mine. We did engineering together at McGill. She's in Calgary.
Hi,
For
Angie.
me, it's about a diversity of thought in the decision making and decision design processes. That's part of the business case. I think that's great. Vinay asks,
definitely.
where do you think lies the inflection point in the life of a company or a leader on diversity and inclusion? Well, I think we kind of answered that because she says at the very beginning as opposed to somewhere between, which is what I was kind of getting at. But I think you already answered that one.
Yeah, I think it's like right at the beginning. You really want
Yeah.
to think about like the team that you want and the different skill sets that you want on the table. And here's the thing: all types of diversity, whether cultural, age, ethnicity, brings to the table new, perspectives and experiences. And I think I mentioned this earlier. When a sales team is different, they can apply a better, range of perspective or out of the box thinking to their challenges, and that's really what you want. That's what you should be striving for.
Yeah, and I want to add one more thing too. We haven't covered much about when we talk about diversity and inclusion. We also have talked about like accessibility and for people, for example, those with disabilities, people who are autistic, and things like that. People have certain challenges. And we had a panel last year for DYPB.
Yeah.
And we had a blind lawyer that was there, and and he talked about stuff that we just take for granted, and it was actually quite amazing to realize that. And I think it's important for us to address the fact that a lot of companies also need to be more mindful of that aspect of diversity and inclusion too.
Totally. And I wrote an article for the Globe around the funding discrepancies between men and women, and I had a lot of women reaching out and saying, we feel like this is very relatable. But then I also had a lot of men reaching out to me, and from the VC world, and they gave me a really interesting perspective, and they said, women need to do a better job at supporting other women. And, that's a point that's been brought up in a lot of the questions here too. And I think that's so true. It's something that I did address in my article. And I think a big challenge and problem is that women, one, are not getting involved in the investment world, but also I think women need to do a better job of supporting and empowering and pulling up the next generation of women. And so I think that's where mentorship really comes in. And so it's not just, for gender equality, it's not just like men. Women also need to be advocating for each other.
We're getting more and more people joining us, and we now have more questions. I'm not sure how long we have, but an awareness around the business case for diversity is important. But behaviors that drive inclusion leads to high-performing cultures and business impact. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of been the theme of today's session is that good ethnic cultural diversity leads to better financial performance. I think it's the stats were those in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to have financial returns above national industry medians, and those in the top quartile for gender diversity are 15% more likely. And so it's definitely hand in hand. Like there's a very direct relationship between a diverse team and companies that have better than average diversity measures tend to have better than average operating margins, and there's a direct correlation there.
Awesome. And we have another, Marianne Curra, who I'm actually interviewing next week for Wisdom Wednesdays. Have you talked about age diversity? No, we didn't actually. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have not talked about age diversity, but I think age, just like every other category, cultural, ethnic, color of your skin, background, gender, I think it's just as important. I mean, why we have this concept of you need to go to college or university, and then you need to have X amount of experience before you're worthy to be in our team. That makes no sense to me. Actually, before you signed on, we were talking about this high school accelerator called the Knowledge Society, and these are some of the smartest kids. They're aged 13 to 18. They're some of the smartest kids that I know. I'm actually hiring some of them for my new startup, because they are hungry, they're driven, they're curious, they're resourceful, and they're 13 years old. So I don't really care if you're 13 or if you're 50. As long as you're driving results, that is the thing that is most impactful and important to me. And so I think age, just like every other category, should be taken with, from a diversity standpoint.
Yeah, and I think my experience with age is that I probably have had ageism before, where I've looked at older people like, well, you can't do this, you're too old, or someone young, oh, you're just a young punk, and I have to hold myself back, because now I've met some amazing people, and the truth is there are amazing people at all ages and all different parts of every spectrum. There's also not so good people, and but I'm really impressed by young people who just show up every day, and like you mentioned, the Knowledge Society, like those kids. I mean, they're teenagers, and they blow my mind in terms of how smart they are. Often I meet people who are like, well, I can't do this. I'm only like 23. I mean, no, you know what? I know 22-year-old professional speakers who travel the world and are amazing. And so why sell yourself short?
And I know some very incompetent 50-year-olds too.
Correct. And there's some 50, 60-year-old people who completely question their value. And I'm like, no, you have so much to offer. But it's important for you to understand, find that value in your brand. There's a great question here by Max. How do you know when your company is too diverse? Is there such a thing as too diverse?
I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, what does that mean? I have no idea.
I don't even know what that means.
There's too much complete balance of every single person there is.
Yeah, there's too many, they're too balanced across the table. They're bringing too many different skill sets to the table. Like, I don't even know how to define too much diversity. I don't think there's a thing as too much.
The only thing I would say is that if you focus on diversity as a means to keep someone that say is incompetent or not performing, because of that, then that's a challenge for your company, because you're like, well, we don't want to let this person go or package them out because of the diversity thing that we're going to lose. But you have to be mindful of that and do what's best for your company, but do it in a very professional way.
Well, that's why looking at it from a skill set perspective is so important. Like, what are they bringing to the table that we don't already have? Because if you're looking at it from that perspective and less from the gender, cultural, ethnicity perspective, then you're naturally going to attract and retain a very diverse workforce. Right.
And we're gonna end on the final question here, which I think is a really good one, by Khadija. She's and I know her because she also does LinkedIn Locals, I believe, in Etobicoke or Mississauga out west. A lot of newcomers might be seeing this. They usually get discouraged from the rejection of no Canadian experience. What piece of advice would you give them to feel inclusive in the Canadian job market?
Yeah, no, I completely understand, and that's such a big challenge, and it's so frustrating, especially because I just recently sponsored a Syrian family, and they're so smart. They're so smart and so qualified and credible, and have had so much experience, but are not getting any work because they just don't have the Canadian experience, which is much an issue that most immigrants are dealing with. And I think there's a few things. The mandates are changing. I think there are a lot of recruitment tools now that have tests that are based on IQ or EQ or profile assessments, which are slowly starting to bridge the gap. Also, that being said, I think here it's just like one of those, you need your big break. So again, I hate using the word hustle, but you really just have to sometimes know that you may have to start again from the bottom. But if you're smart and capable and competent, which I'm sure you are, you eventually will climb the ladder very quickly. And that's also why I love the startup community, because you're rewarded here based on your merit and what you're bringing to the table and your skills and impact, and rather than in corporate companies it's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy, and you have to sort of climb slowly up the ladder. And I think it's about finding the right opportunities and finding the person that'll give you that big break. And there are a lot of people who will. Like, I'm one of those people. I don't necessarily care if you have Canadian experience or not, as long as you can do the task at hand. That's sort of the number one most important thing to me. So it's really just constantly hustling and putting yourself out there.
One thing I'll add to that is Canada is a country of diversity, and actually it's embedded in our culture. So we're actually far more open and willing to support people who are struggling with this aspect. So if you just ask for help, there's a lot of resources out there and people are willing to help you in that area. So I think it's really important. The other thing is, there's things you can do to set yourself apart in terms of your brand. You can create your own content, you can network more effectively, you can try to build a large sphere of influence that'll help you get those opportunities more than other people are doing. So there's things you can do to try to leverage that.
Definitely.
And why do you like the word hustle? You mentioned you don't like the word hustle. So.
Hustle and disruption are two words that I think have been overused this year, and I think people need to stop.
Really?
But I just used it, so.
I know. I was just curious where that came from. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate you coming by. Thank you, Fatima, for your insights. If you guys want to find her or ask her questions or connect with her, what's the best, this is your chance to promote yourself and your company.
Yeah, for sure. My name is Fatima Zaidi. I'm available on LinkedIn. I am the Vice President of Biz Dev at 88, and also Quill Inc., which is one of my new tech softwares that I'm launching this summer. And I also have Twitter, obviously, so Zaidi A. Fatima is my handle.
Awesome. So next week we'll have Marianne Kerr for our interview for Wisdom Wednesdays. I'll be here back 8:30 a.m. every day, Monday to Friday, for the daily broadcast. There's other questions coming up, but because this is going to be recorded, so more questions will
And
show
people
up.
feel free to reach out to me
Yeah,
directly.
reach out to her, and that's great. If you, again, like this, comment below, tag people, share us on your pages. Let's get more people a part of this conversation. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful day, and we'll talk soon. Bye.